Thank you for coming to the Fayetteville Library this evening, and those of you watching at home, appreciate you. Tonight, we're very lucky to have some special guests with us, but first I'd like to point out that on the back table, we have some questionnaires that help us with future programming, and just some flyers about some library programs, as well as there's some cool giveaways from the Archaeological Survey Department. So let me turn this over to Jessica, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you to the Fayetteville Public Library for partnering with us on Arkansas Archaeology Month events. My name is Jessica Kowalski. I'm a station archaeologist with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight a special guest, Mayor Lionel Jordan. Mayor Jordan is going to read the official proclamation for Arkansas Archaeology Month.
Good evening, everyone. I always look forward to doing this every year, and because we are celebrating, I think it's important that we continue to remember our past for not only just us, but our children and our children's children. So the work that you all are doing is really, really very special in preserving the past. So tonight is an honor for me to bring the Arkansas Archaeology Month proclamation for you all. And it goes, whereas archaeology is the study of both the past, before there was any written records, and the study of historic sites, where archaeology supplements written records to enrich our understanding of where, when, and how past peoples lived. And whereas Fayetteville, Arkansas has an important archaeological heritage holding clues about our rich and diverse history, but those sites are fragile and endangered by erosion, inadvertent destruction, looting, or vandalism. And whereas archaeological sites are important to our city's history, these sites contain physical remains, the discarded tools, ruined buildings, and daily objects utilized by past peoples who lived in or moved through Fayetteville, Arkansas. And whereas Arkansas archaeologists seek to increase our citizens' awareness of our state's archaeological history as a means of protecting and preserving these irreplaceable links to our past. Now, therefore, I, Lionel Jordan, Mayor of the great city of Fayetteville, Arkansas, do hereby proclaim March 24th as Arkansas Archaeology Month in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and encourage our residents to recognize the efforts of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey and the Arkansas Archaeological Society in preserving our past. This is for you all. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you all for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Mayor Jordan, for reading the proclamation. And I should have introduced Mr. Joe Rainey. He's the president of our local chapter of the Arkansas Archaeological Society. If any of you are interested in finding out a little bit more about our volunteer group and some of the activities we do, we have information in the back. We also have information about all our Arkansas Archaeology Month activities, so please feel free to pick up some pamphlets And, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So now I would like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Carl Drexler. Dr. Drexler is an archaeologist with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey. He's our research station archaeologist in Magnolia. He teaches at Southern Arkansas University, and he also has a research title here in the Department of Anthropology here at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Drexler specializes in 18th through 20th century archaeology, battle or conflict-related archaeology, and the archaeology of the Caddo. Dr. Drexler tonight will be talking to us about both Caddo and settler salt production. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Drexler.
Thank you, Dr. Kowalski. So thank you for having me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a major project that we've been collaborating on down in southwest Arkansas this past summer and for several summers before that, and to which we're returning this coming June, so it's a little bit of an ad and encouragement to come and join us. But as we get started, I always hope we have people in the room, this is maybe their first archaeological presentation. I said, we've been collaborating on, well, who is we? We have two organizations that have done a lot of work to put these together. We have the Arkansas Archaeological Society, which is the local chapter here. And then we have the Arkansas Archaeological Survey. So the survey is a unit of the University of Arkansas system. They want us to emphasize that to everyone all the time. And we have 10 research stations scattered around the state, mostly tied to state universities, but also a couple state parks. And 7 of those stations divide 75 counties, there's a lot of math here, into research territories. So I'm down at SAU, home of the Mule Riders, and I have 11 counties out of southwest Arkansas for which I am responsible. So I did, as Dr. Kowalski mentioned, I started off, my specialty is really 19th century, do a lot of 19th century conflict-oriented stuff, which I got my start in here in northwest Arkansas back in 2001 at the Van Winkle's mill site. And very unsubtle plug, I think March 23rd, I'm going to be giving a talk about that project out at Hobbs State Park. March 24th. It's more than a week out. I'm not looking at that part of my calendar yet. Archaeology Month is a heck of a thing. We have a lot of stuff going on. But thank you, Dr. Rathgaber. But my research territory also requires that we get fully schooled in the 12,000 or more years of human history that's in those territories. So for me, that involves learning about the Caddos, which my research territory falls almost entirely within the ancestral bounds of the homeland of the Caddo Nation. Another unsubtle plug, at the end of April, the 26th and 27th, we'll be having the Caddo Conference here in Fayetteville at the Tyson Center. It's a really neat archaeological conference all focused on Caddo subjects, and encourage everyone to come out for that. And the project I'm going to tell you about is in Sevier County. I was the dig director, and we knew this was a cool site, and as we did more digging on it, it got even cooler. We'll start to unpack a little bit of that. So we've been working on this site, which historically is known as Holman Springs, because we filled out the first paperwork on it back in 1960. The landowner, the last name was Holman. We also now refer to it as Nakuukuwidish, and this was a name that we developed, we asked for, and then it was given to us by the Caddo Nation. They have a linguist on staff. And Nakuukuwidish is a Caddo name that emphasizes the Caddo connections to the site. Basically, the Na is a locative prefix in the Caddo language, so like Natchitoches, Louisiana, or Nacogdoches, Texas. It means sort of place of or people of the place of. Kuku is water, and Widdish is salt, so it's the place of the water salt, which gives you a little bit of an idea about what the site's all about. It lies in what is called the Little River region, and it's one of the areas most associated with the production of salt, particularly by the Caddos. And southwest Arkansas, indeed much of Arkansas, has some very deeply buried salt deposits, but there are a few places where we have salt domes, or they're sometimes referred to as diapiers, that come up. They bring the salt sort of up from these 800-foot deep deposits and bring it up close enough to the surface that groundwater can wash through it. And so we have a couple areas, one in Sevier County, one more in Clark County around Arkadelphia, where we get essentially these salt marshes near the surface. The water has some salinity. Dr. Acreage here did a study. It's not terribly salty now, but it's salty enough that I would point out we've done many summers of excavation there with no mosquito issues. So there is some effect. We're going to knock on wood that persists through this June. But this brine basically is what has drawn people to the site that we refer to as Nakuukuwidish now. And people were there making salt from this brine for literally hundreds of years. We've got several carbon samples run on this, most of them funded by the Archaeological Research Fund of the Arkansas Archaeological Society, so very much thank you to the members for that. And the earliest dates we have are the late 1200s, and the latest dates we have are the late 1500s. So there's a very long span of time. And the early 1200, or the late 1200 dates that we have are some of the earliest carbon dates we have off a Caddo salt making site. So this is one of the earliest ones we have out there. We have similar sites down in Louisiana and Texas that all date to the 1500s and 1600s. So the Arkansas ones seem to date earlier. And people were making salt there on a very consistent, steady basis. So much so that this is one of our first field photographs from 1968. And we had basically, so this is about ground surface. And this is a mound that, unlike most mounds in the Caddo world, was not created by basket loading dirt. It's basically, it was solid, broken pottery sherds from bottom to top. And this gentleman right here, this guy by the name of Ernest Seibert, who's a navigational archaeologist from DeQueen, who, when the survey opened, made sure that a lot of the important sites in this area were documented. So very much, thanks to him. I know from his World War II draft card that he was about 5'10", so when I say it's a 10-foot tall mound, it was almost 2 Ernest tall. Now, this is one of the last photos we have of the mound on the site, because in the 1970s it got bulldozed. The landowner didn't want this mound in his field, and as a result of that bulldozing, means that the site is famous within the Arkansas Archaeological Society and Survey for being the site that is, quote unquote, more sherds than dirt. That pottery basically gets pushed across the rest of the site, and so every time we've gone out there to dig a unit after that, we basically have to go through about 20 centimeters of broken pottery with a little bit of dust on it, and then we get under that and things change. But our first excavations there in the 1980s, they went so far. So those piles of sherds are individual bucket loads, a lot of them from one unit. It's an absolutely astounding amount of material that comes out of it. It indicates to us how extensive and thorough the Caddo salt making on the site was. Now, these digs were started, we had two summer digs. The first ones were in 1985 and 1986. They were under the direction of Dr. Frank Schambach, who was my predecessor at SAU. For various reasons, they were never written up, never completed. Some of the details got lost. We're almost 40 years out from those digs. And, we have an ethical obligation as archaeologists to complete projects that we start. So a couple years ago, I had the idea, well, maybe we need to do some more excavations there to try to pull Frank's data together with new stuff and make this all make sense. Well, just even starting off, we had a difficulty. Frank's dig maps were tied into the one big tree on the site, which is great from year to year. From 85 to 86, that tree was right there. They could tie off it. Well, carbon-based life forms die, and so that tree is no longer there. So we have sort of these grids kind of floating in space. When we started the training program in 2022, I thought they kind of lined up like this. So the yellow squares are the units that we did in 2022. The green ones are the ones from the 80s. I thought this is about how they lined up, and we spent a lot of time with like the old field photographs, sort of like, well, there's a bridge in the background, and if you sort of hold it this way, I think this is kind of right. But we really didn't have a good feel for how these things actually mapped on the landscape. We did a lot of conjecture, but when we got out there, one of the first things that popped up was we actually started finding some of the old 1980s excavation units. So we're doing the archaeology of ourselves. It was very important because then once we get those units all tied in, now it puts all the data in proper geographic context and we can add our new stuff to the old. It was actually kind of neat. We found these first by ear and not by sight. Paul Knapp, one of our volunteers who's from right around here, was shovel skimming, and I noticed that the shovel, you listen to it, it goes shh, and he moved it south and did the same sound. We couldn't find out that this excavation unit here, the first one we found, had been backfilled with chunks of asphalt, so you could actually hear the shovel blade hit it. And as we pulled more and more of that out, not only do we find the footprints of the excavation units, we found some nice 1980s plastic. It was a good object lesson in the non-biodegradability of some things. In the 2022 project, we also had one major surprise. So my idea was we're going to go out there, we'll fill in some of Frank's data, 1 year, good to go. My dear friend Jamie Brandon was fond of quoting the thing, no good plan survives its first contact with reality. So in the 1980s, we have these field photographs of the excavation units, and we have these blue tarps. They had 2 in 85, 1 in 86. That's Frank Schambach's headquarters tent, set up right in the middle of the site. And we do geophysical surveys in advance of the projects now, in part just to plan the digs, but also, all the field research that I've been doing out here, we have developed the research plans in collaboration with the Caddo Nation and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And they want us to make a good faith attempt to do things like, try to identify burials and avoid them. So, we do that in advance. And there's this one, we did a magnetic survey over the site, and there was this one big giant magnetic anomaly right where Frank's tent was. And I've worked on sites where we've had archaeologists who worked there in the past, and metal pin flags, foil sandwich wrappers, batteries, you name it, stuff falls out of people's pockets and it gets left behind. So I'm like, okay, well, this is good. We're gonna find Frank's missing penknife from 1986. Well, we started digging, and there was brick. It was very soft brick, which generally on 19th century sites, then it's an indicator that it's pre-railroad, because as soon as you can get a railroad in, it's a lot easier to bring in like really nice bricks. It's a lot cheaper than making them on site. Machine-made bricks are a lot harder than handmade ones. And so it's handmade bricks. As we dug more, like they're in place, and there's at least 3 courses of them. So it was really confusing. I took a lot of flack from people I go out to a Caddo site and I have to find a 19th century thing. They're like, you can't get away from it, Carl, which is fair. But also, this is rural South Arkansas. In antebellum, effectively antebellum, because the railroads come through in the 1870s. In antebellum South Arkansas, you're probably not going to find a foundation that's got like a brick curtain wall, particularly out in the countryside. You might find something in town where like the one wealthy guy can afford that. Out in the country, almost everything's put on like a stone pier, unless it's like a giant plantation house, which you would probably have had historical record of. And there's nothing like that associated with this site. So, as we found in the wall of one of our excavation units, I said, okay, well, we'll open the next one up and we'll see just how wide this wall is. We can start chasing out, this house. We opened the next one, and it turned out it's not actually a house. This was actually it kept going. It was mind-boggling. It's a salt furnace. We had no indication that this was here. I have no idea how Frank got his tent poles or tent stakes in around this thing, because it sat right on top of it. By the end of that first project, we had this nice drone shot showing the basic elements of what we have. So we have the two brick walls defining the edges of the furnace. We have the chimney footing at one end and the flue directed out to a big fire pit out in front of it. You see that little corner unit we took out of this last square? You get below the brick rubble and it's just inky black sooty material. There's just massive amounts of fire had taken place in there. And so basically what this is a 19th century salt reduction facility set up somewhat like, this is a sorghum mill at the Winthrop Rockefeller, sorghum furnace at the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, with my personal pickup truck in the background. Okay, just a set. Basically what you'd have is you have a firebox at one end, supporting walls. This uses this sort of flat rectangular evaporator pan. The one that we were excavating at Nakuukuwidish would have used big cast iron kettles. And you basically start a fire, the heat's drawn up through the chimney, and then you do the evaporation by heating the kettles or the pan through there. You're basically, you have a whole host of 19th century technologies that are sort of focused around taking things out of solution and rendering them into a solid state. So, sorghum, sugarcane, all through the Caribbean, essentially processed through these same kind of facilities. But this is about what I thought it looked like before we went in the field this past year. So this past summer, decided to go back to what was then only known as Holman Springs. This was the Dig t-shirt. It's clearly the coolest, most metal one in the history of the society. Very proud of it. This coming summers, we'll have Nakuukuwidish emblazoned across it with a translation. But we had a couple goals that we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to look both more at the Caddo occupation at the site and learn more about the 1830 salt furnace. And so we're going to work on, we focused on these in basically two parts of the dig. So this is basically a map of all of our excavation units. So we've got Frank's stuff are all the units that are a little bit off of pure, up and down, left, right. And then this is the salt furnace right here. And we've got some other excavation units that we started filling in around Frank's. And this also has the features from the 1980s mapped on it. And so look at two areas that we're digging in. So the Caddo portion we looked at we call Area 1. And remember this layout of those 4 units up there. And then this Area 2 is going to be an expansion on our excavations at the salt furnace. So start off with Area 1. This was the Caddo portion, and there's also if you come out to participate in the training program, we have basic excavation classes. This is Dr. Ford working with one of our students, very clearly, Brian Struckenberg. So if you come to dig with us, we'll train you how to do it. It's a great thing about the training program. Absolutely love it. But the 4 units that we had at the end of 2022, had the features in it as well, and then we added 4 more units on there. So we're basically looking for the artifacts and the features. Well, again, with the first 20 centimeters, we're basically running into just huge volumes of potsherds that are just sort of scattered all around. So it's mind-boggling if you worked on their site. We also had a big chunk of asphalt right in the middle, which was a little frustrating. I'll come back to that in a minute. But we started skimming through those that basically redeposited mound fill, plus a bunch of roots. And as we got under that, we started finding other things. And so Still a lot of potsherds, but we started getting reddened earth, like you see, and it's got this sort of reddish color to it. And then we get these little stacks of potsherds, and we even had several. This is basically the broken base of a pot that was turned upside down. And so there's not more of the pot underneath it, it's only the base that's set there. And it was very flat. And there are a couple others right adjacent to it that are basically in that same alignment. And there's also a lot of charcoal flecking in the soil here. And essentially what this is this is a reconstruction of the other major excavated Caddo salt works is called the Hardman site. Ann Early's publication from the 1990s has this reconstruction of it. The note in the middle here, you have this basically area of a large, open, expansive fire with some bowls and salt pans set out in it. And that's how the Caddos were making salt. They basically made a bunch of these sort of high-sided vessels, put the brine in it, put it over basically a large broad fire, and would boil the water out. And the pottery that they're making is it's nicely made, but it's sort of closer to like a terracotta consistency. So before the water boils out, some of that seeps in, and as the salt comes out of solution, the crystals form and helps lever the pot apart, so they break really quickly, which is partly why we have this 10-foot tall mound of pottery. These things probably only last through one or two uses. So we have the reddened earth is from heating, charcoal flecking is from the fire, and these broken pieces of pottery and those upturned bases are basically elevators that they're putting the pots on so you can get more of the fuel wood underneath. Makes it a little more efficient process. And one thing to note about Hardman, we'll compare it to Nakuukuwidish. Here you have, so they're getting the brine out of this water source here. You're carrying it to the center of the site, and you have an adjacent house, and it literally looks like it has a sort of stockade. It's not like a really effective fortification. It's sort of more like a fence that went around the site. They have this really nice, very clear arcing loop of post holes. It's one of the only sites we've seen that on. So we have a layout at Hardman that we can then compare to Nakuukuwidish. Now, we'll come back to the rodent burrows later, but this is Catherine Brile from the State Historic Preservation Office. She's working on the edge of what we call Feature 2. It's an area that somehow had even thicker density of sherds in it compared to everything else. So there's this sort of massive sort of hump of sherds that when we call it Feature 2, it sort of works across these units. That when we get outside of that, and so get under the redeposited mound and outside of this Feature 2, which is running along through here, you see the dirt color changes dramatically. The sherd density over here dropped very, very low. And these dark spots are features. This one's the remnant. You're looking at this one in profile. This is the remains of a post hole. So this was actually getting parts of the Caddo architecture now, where it looks like we've got essentially an edge to the salt producing area. We don't get the red heating in the soil. We don't get the charcoal flecking in this area. That seems to cut off that Feature 2. So what it looks like we have is that we have so this is showing context. It looks like they're making salt into this area. Feature 2 may have been sort of like a cleaning deposit, like pushing some of the broken pottery out, making a little sort of humped area. And then as you get outside of that, we have basically a residential area here. So it's a different layout than we get with Hardman, where Hardman had the salt making at the center of a residential unit. This, we have it's more so that you have the salt marsh there, production area, and then habitation outside of that. Now, we did have this weird asphalt block in the middle, which there's no Caddo asphalt. We're a couple hundred years off. So I had to kind of explain that. And what I had an idea. I thought it was this 35-pound chunk of road may have been used to fill in an animal burrow. If you're running heavy equipment in that area, if you have an animal burrow there, it sucks the tire down. We know this experimentally because when we were backfilling the units at the end of 2022, there was a rodent burrow that our rented tractor sort of went into, and it took a minute to get it out. But at the end of the project, I did make people dig it up and make sure we did have an animal burrow there. And then I may have sent a 35-pound chunk of asphalt into the lab to harass our lab director. My apologies to Dr. Mary Beth Trubit for that. But it was, we needed to have that documentation that we had this, the fancy way that archaeologists say it is bioturbation taking place on site, which, we had other evidence of this. So this is Jessica Cogburn. She's, sitting around feature 2, but we have another animal burrow cutting through there. So it's very active remodeling of the site. And yes, I did stick my phone into it to get a photo out through. So it's fun. We actually found a mouse running around in the burrow one morning, probably wondering, what is going on? Where'd my roof go? We found him after we pulled back the tarp after removing the thing that was probably looking for him. So our deepest thanks to Steve Longacre for taking a shovel and hucking this thing off into the weeds. It's a juvenile cottonmouth. We're next to a salt marsh, so you get snakes, you get mice. At least 2 large alligators as well. So there are neighbors, but it's okay. Haven't had any run-ins yet. Again, knock on wood on that. So we've started to be able to basically delineate this, these use areas, and that ties in with some of the data that we have from the 1980s. We have Frank's, the Society's plot of features that they found in the 1980s under Frank's direction. So we also have some hearths that were excavated in the 1980s. A lot of times you're going to find those inside a house. And there were some burials that were excavated there back in the 1980s, including at least 1 child. And sometimes, children are buried inside a home. So all this together might give us the ability to start identifying house footprints and give us a little better depiction of the Caddo community that was there. And they're resident, they're living on the site, and in a couple cases dying on the site. Along with their pet dogs. There were 2 dog burials dug there in the 1980s as well. So the Caddo occupation is really kind of fascinating. And then, with Area 2, the salt furnace, was very fascinating to see more about that, because this is one of only a literal, like less than 5 handful of 19th century rural salt furnaces that have been ever excavated in North America. These are very, very rare. The salt industry at the time, you have some large industrial facilities in the Kanawha Valley in what is now West Virginia, or the very evocatively named Saltville, Virginia. But those are supplying, sort of areas that have good access to transportation facilities. This is something that's set out, very much in a more rural context, and so this is all about local supplies. So, flashback to this real quick. This is where we left it in 2022, which in our dig maps we added. We reopened some and added some more. So we started off, we simply re-excavated some of the units that we had dug in 2022. And I get very giddy about having things work out, surveying wise. And so when we reestablished our grid, and re-excavated one of these units. We had all 4 corners of the plastic that we had backfilled with. So we're only off by maybe a couple millimeters. This made me entirely too excited. I am that kind of dork. No problem about that. But when we pulled that out, we basically were then able to have the furnace as we had seen it the preceding year re-exposed. And Dr. Trubit, our station archaeologist at Henderson State, if you take a basic excavation class from her, one of the things she drills into your head is you dig from the known to the unknown. And so we started this past summer with what we knew from previous digs, and then expand out from there. So we started off, we wanted to re-excavate and learn more about the fire pit, and this was a really special experience. I mean that both in sort of positive and other ways. This isn't dirt. This is really just brick rubble, sort of degraded mid-19th century brick, and it's really hard to go through. And there was so much of it that early on we adopted a strategy where anything that wasn't a brick bat that had multiple corners on it that could have some kind of diagnostic to it, we started just simply weighing it and leaving it in the field, because there were literally thousands of pounds of this material, which collecting it, curating it, it's not going to tell us that much outside of what we already know, that it's sort of early to mid 19th century brick. Plus, Dr. Trubit may have quit if we started sending her literally 3 dozen bags of brick rubble per day. As we pull that out, as we get underneath the brick, you start seeing this just wide open expanse of this really hard, thick, black material that Steve Jacober, one of our volunteers, is leaning on. And it's that black layer basically extends across the entire unit, and it actually stretches across multiple units. So Jacober's on it here, Dan Sharp's on it here, and actually it comes up, this is something else to talk about in a minute. And so it's this really expansive deposit that, as we dug through it, which dug involved pickaxes and rock hammers at times, actually it looks like there are 2 distinct levels to it. So it's really, really cool. So you got the brick rubble, you have the burn layer, you have this light layer is basically burned earth, and underneath that there's a thin stratum of more of that black burning, another stratum of burned earth, and then there's the subsoil underneath it. So we have 2 burning periods represented. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, because it turns out that's a sort of an interesting story. So we have, that is in the fire pit in front of the main furnace. We also had some of our volunteers work into the furnace and into the flue itself. And this turned out to be really hard. Just I mentioned that handmade bricks are really, really soft. These ones, just early on in their efforts, actually just ran a trowel straight through them, because they get them, they've got some groundwater in them. It took a minute to sort of figure out literally get a feel for doing this. But through their efforts over the 2 weeks, the ends of the flue, so the fire pit's here, this is the end of the furnace, and the flue in the middle starts to emerge. And by the end of it, we've got, the courses, this is the face of it, looking into the fire pit. The pit itself, the edge came down like this. The ends of all these bricks are vitrified, which is basically a process where when bricks are exposed to really high heat, the silicates in them basically melt and form essentially a glass. And so this was the side facing the fire pit. had been exposed to enough heat that the glass, the ends of the bricks basically glaze over. And as we got the full thing explored, you can see you got some tumbled in brick in the end of it. But, so this is almost ground level at the top. It's actually semi-subterranean. It was a lot deeper than I expected it to be. This was a really fascinating thing. So this was the unexcavated portion. It's got the flues going deep, we get the fire pit. And then we have that one, that last excavation unit out at the end, called Test Unit 14. It's this one right here. Archaeology is great for presenting you with the site. You think you know what's going on, and then you open another excavation unit, and everything falls apart. You totally, makes you second guess everything you know about life. I did mention to Kim that one should probably not squat on bulk boards. This would not probably be OSHA compliant, but it was an effective technique. So we've got more of this sort of dark fill. This is actually a separate deposit from the fire pit. And we know that because when we're excavating that unit, the fire pit comes up and this basically overlaid it. And these light portions here are all pieces of broken iron kettle. So we know he had a kettle, and apparently one of them didn't survive. Some of these a lot of times these kettles will get reused and repurposed to other places. You find a lot of them as like flower planters now. And Historic Washington State Park has like 5 or 6 just sort of scattered around in weird, out of the way places. It's a little bit like a treasure hunt to track them down. But one of them broke here, and so we know that it was, Noah was using a kettle. Show you this. These are very distinct deposits. So this is the edge of the brick scatter in the fire pit, and then where Erin Rooney's excavating here, she's in that darker, greasier deposit. Which this stuff was really just an amazing excavation experience, because digging through any kind of soot, a lot of times it will get on you. This stuff was literally, basically, it felt greasy in texture. It got on everything. Matthew, I don't know if Matthew was ever able to get all that out of the clothes. I see Mason. That should be a nice bright metal screen. It's not. You can see the Vector pile behind him and below him is covered in that dark stuff. And when we took the bags to the lab, you could tell which ones came from that part of the site versus not. It just got in everything. And somebody went to go use my total station and didn't wash their hands. I'm okay about it though. But and when we had it finally all dug out, it turns into basically sort of standard subsoil underneath it. Now, significantly, when we started looking at some of the artifacts that were coming out of it, we have what we think are maybe bear bone contained therein. It's the first time I think I've ever seen bear remains come off the site. There's more animal bone in this than there is in the fire pit, and I'm still trying to figure out what all I think is going on with it. I would note that in the 19th century, one of our first major exports is bear grease. So, cooking down and rendering bear is something that's going on at the time. It's why we get called the bear state, as we had so many of them. It's a special thing. So when we came out of there, we have, this is a inky feature sort of overlaying the fire pit that's here, and then there was a big scatter of brick that came along here. I think that's basically the chimney fall being pushed over. And it's a really sort of fascinating thing, because we have this very tightly contained 19th century deposit surrounded by Caddo material. A lot of 19th century sites will have, maybe like, the house, and then there'll be a scatter of artifacts around it. It's nails, it's, broken glass, broken pottery. There's no municipal trash pickup at the time, so people just sort of, stuff winds up around the house. There's none of that. You get outside of this little brick scatter that Jason's standing on, and it's back into Caddo sherd deposits immediately. It's only Caddo stuff outside of it. It's really weird to see things so tightly contained in this one area. So there are a couple things that we can sort of say about the furnace now that we couldn't say before last summer. We know a lot more about the architecture of the furnace. It is buried, the flue is significantly in the ground. What I thought had been basically, the remains of it, the top had been stripped away. Well, actually, that may have been about where the area where the kettles set. So they sat lower, and the flue was semi-subterranean, which is actually a really genius thing if you're trying to manage heat energy, because it basically turns the earth surrounding the furnace into an insulator. And one of the things about operating a furnace like this, you don't sort of turn it on, turn it off for a couple hours when you need to make salt. When these things are in operation in the 19th century, they're kept literally hot enough to boil brine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because some of these kettles get to be 100, 150 gallons, and the amount of time it would take to reheat a cold kettle of that size to boiling temperatures required so much time and fuel that they decided it was just easier to keep them going the entire time. So you only find this kind of furnace in a place where you have enough fuel wood that you can sort of keep that going. That's why we have such these heavy burn deposits. There's also a lot of ash concretions in the artifact bags from this. It is really interesting when you look at the history of the salt industry. All these facilities start off essentially burning either coal or wood as a fuel source, and as that eats up the local forest, they basically all switch to a passive solar operation. Even in Onondaga, New York, is one of the big production areas, which is up by Syracuse. It's not an area known for its year-round large amounts of sunlight, but by the late 19th century, it's a entirely passive solar operation, which some interesting parallels with resource consumption is questions that we're dealing with today. You mentioned that we had those two burning episodes. We have Bev Watkins from Sherwood had done a lot of historical research on the site as we're getting into it. So we have some documentation that's being used in the 1830s, so we knew it was built by then, and it's used during the Civil War as well. And so we had this period where we thought, okay, well, it's between the 1830s and the 1860s, it's probably in use, it's just not being documented. It's really common for Southwest Arkansas. The documents we have are a lot sparser than what's actually going on. But I think actually what we may be seeing is that there's actually two periods of operation, and that gap in the historical data may actually be reflective of a gap in use, in that it gets used in the 1830s. We know that there's a guy by the name of Green Orr who builds it. He winds up running down to Texas when the Revolution takes place, and he has a whole new life down around Matagorda Bay as soon as the Texas independence happens. And it looks like then the site actually goes out of use. So that first lower, burned earth layer and the overlaying black is probably from the 1830s. It's basically, you have a real hot fire, it burns the earth to sort of almost like a low pottery consistency. And then it goes out of use for 30 years. Dirt blows in, site's not being used. Civil War starts, and the furnace goes back in operation as Confederate government officers in the area are trying to basically provide salt to the locals because they're cut off by the usual sources of supply. And so that dirt that's blown in, as it's got new fire burning on top of it, cooks into that second layer. So it looks like we actually have these two burning periods. Now, the field photos are fascinating, but at least as much, if not more, archaeology takes place in the lab. And full credit to the people who came out and were part of the lab portion of this. This is not an easy task to keep up with. The massive influx of bags that are coming in every day. So Dr. Trubitt and her staff washed 350 bags of artifacts during the 2 weeks. Just a massive amount of work. So they got it all washed. This must be early in the project, everyone's still smiling. But then we washed it, dried it, did the sorting on it, and also did a lot of the initial analysis on it. So we're developing a data set, and there's just a huge amount of material to go through. And this, the society being able to bring out as many people as they do, it makes this possible to get this project done. And a couple of cool little small finds that came out of it. We're still sort of amassing the big data set. You're in here several times, Mason. We have a bone bead that came off the came out of the screens. It's one of the first ones we've ever encountered. We have the end of basically like an axe head and a salt fragment there. Most of the pottery that we have are plainwares. These are mostly salt vessels. They didn't decorate a ton. We do get a kind of type we refer to as Nashneck banded. It's basically this sort of corrugation around the top. They did put that on saltwares. I think both decorative, but also gives you some traction if you're trying to pick it up, a little texture. But there were a couple of nice engraved shirts that came out of it as well. These, this was a place where people, caddos, lived. And so, they have, their utilitarian wares, and they also have the things that they furnish their household with. And we actually, see some amount of that here. We also have salt kettle fragments, and then we found a couple of projectile points. There's really not a ton of lithics on the site, which is a little weird. But the types that we've been able to identify, we have both mod and scalarin points, as we call them. These are utilitarian points that are very common in the sort of 1300s and 1400s for this part of the time. And it's also one of the things that's important to know for us about this is that these are coming basically out of that redeposited moundfill. And in our discussions of the project with the Caddos, we've been very careful to say, we're not going to we're going to try very hard not to disturb burials. And we know from the little bit of work that's been done in the Little River region, these 2 points are the sort of workaday points. You don't find them in burial context generally. There are a couple other points that if we had found them would suggest that there had been burials in the mound that then got disturbed. We haven't seen really evidence of that to this point. Now, when we look a little closer at sort of massive data sets that have come out of this project, the tempering agents that are added into pottery in this part of the world, later when you get into sort of post about 1300, you get a lot of shell tempered pottery, using crushed up mussel shell. It gives it these little sort of white flecks here. Earlier on, they're using grog and grit tempered pottery. So just generally to give us a temporal feel for the site, when we look at things like temper, it's almost entirely shell tempered stuff, so that that post 1300 kind of ties in with our radiocarbon dates. You can see we've got 110,705 shell tempered sherds and 175 grog tempered sherds. So it's vast majority. It's the sort of later signature. With salt ceramics in particular, we look at shape as well. Early on, the Caddos made these sort of wide pans. They get real thick at the bottom, which is not, it's really fuel inefficient to have a piece of pottery that's that thick because you have to push, so much heat energy through. So the transition to thin-sided bowls comes in fairly quickly thereafter. We have a few, we have some of that, thicker salt panware, but then the vast majority of stuff out there is what we call these coarsewares. They're from the salt bowls. And then there are some fine wares from, these are the things that people are going to be decorating their houses with and using domestically, not for production. A lot of the decorations that we get are simple sort of punctates like this. see a larger collection of sure is kind of cool to see those refits. You know, the decorations, mostly it's what we call punctated wares, or punctated designs. These are this kind of thing, and then get these around here. These are actually one of my favorite things in all of archaeology, because these are fingernail punctates. So these were made by the potter sticking their fingernail into it. So you have basically the little impression of someone's fingers from, you know, 700 years ago at this point, preserved in there. It's such a great, you know, small connection to the person in the past. Love those. And, you know, we have some incised, some brushed, some appliqued, and very little engraved. Where, you know, the engravings are the late, you know, sort of really high art style ones. We don't see a ton of that at this site. A lot of, you know, we get a lot of these in that Nakuukuwidish banded that we consider that a kind of punctate. You see those as well there. You also get like little appliques like this little note right here. So it's not as opulent of a ceramics assemblage as you get from like a big, you know, sort of ceremonial center, but there is some nice decorated stuff there. Cool little strap handle shown, and then former director Dr. George Sabo showing off. We have one of the few name types we've been able to identify from the site is the type we call Avery engraved. But most of the vessels look about like this. And types we refer to as Nakuukuwidish banded, McKinney plain, Emery punctated incised, and Dawat incised. So they're basically these sort of large, sort of tall bowls. Now, significantly, the pottery, you know, when we compare it to other known Caddo salt sites, there's only one that bears a strong resemblance to, and that's a site called Saltwell Slough in North Texas, which Caddo archaeology is sort of weird in that we break up the past into what we call phases. And there's one called the McCurtain phase that is described in a publication from 1990 where the authors spent a lot of time complaining about how modern state boundaries affect how we understand the past too much. And then when they describe the McCurtain phase, they say, well, it runs up to the Arkansas border. We kind of did the same thing. But the pottery that we see at Holman Springs looks a lot like what was documented at Saltwell Slough. There's just more of it. And, you know, we don't have a good phase description for this period of the Little River region, so it may, you know, one of the things that may come out of this project is, you know, sort of reevaluation of the bounds of the McCurtain phase. And, you know, we call the site Nakuukuwidish, and you mentioned that, you know, similar date ranges to the McCurtain phase. We have carbon dates from the site that go from the late 1200s to the late 1500s. And the late 1500s is kind of significant, and I'm going to do the archetypal Arkansas historian thing of bringing Hernando de Soto in the story. I mention him because the Hernando de Soto expedition comes through what is now southwest Arkansas in the 1540s. And they record place names for provinces, as I understood them, in the area at the time. And one of the names that gets recorded, they render as Nakuukuwidish, which John Swanton in the early 1900s interprets this as a Spanish corruption of Nakuukuwidish, which, you know, basically means, you know, people of the salt or place of the people of the salt. And so salt production, I'm not saying that, you know, Nakuukuwidish is Nakuukuwidish from that time, but salt making is going on to a sufficient extent in the 1500s at places like Nakuukuwidish that it is how people identify themselves to others. And so we know that the Caddos and their constituent tribes at the time, you know, they are trading salt to the Wichitas, they're trading it out to the lower Mississippi Valley. It's one of the things that makes them economically and politically strong compared to the neighbors. That and the Osage orange makes good bows, doing a lot of trading. And so this activity is such an important part of Caddo identity at the time that this is how they're sort of representing themselves to these newcomers from coming in from the east. Now, we still have a lot more to process coming out of this, and we will be bringing more in next summer, this coming summer. It's just creeping up on us real fast. I will state that when we go out there this June, we will be sampling the top 20 centimeters. We're not going to be doing full recovery this time, so it'll be a little less. But if you choose to come out and join us, we have the excavations, we have the lab going on. You can do as many of either of those as you like. We also have classes that get taught. So this past summer, Dr. Bob Scott from our parking office taught a site survey class. Working so that Nakuukuwidish is right around here. Bob took his class up along the rolling fork, documented a couple of multi-component sites along it. We also had a mapping class with Dr. Kowalski, a photogrammetry class with Dr. Emily Bean from our Winthrop Rockefeller Institute one, and then Dr. Glenn Akridge taught archaeological chemistry, and took everyone outside and had them stare at the sun for a little while. For science, so almost everyone's holding a special instrument, but apparently we were a short one, and Dr. Rooney just kind of faked it for the photo. And we also had one on historical archaeology with Dr. Andrew Beaupre, who was going to take on this summer's training program. He was going to go to Arkansas Post, but then an opportunity arose for him to return to New England and work there. So we're going to do one more summer out at Nakuukuwidish. So the plan for this coming summer, and encourage everyone to come. When we started the planning for this, actually back in 2019, pandemic came in and got a little sidetracked. The original idea was basically, so these were Frank Schaumbach's units, and the idea was we're going to sort of dig through here and create essentially a complete map of the Caddo features on the site. This would give us a way to make this site more comparable to Hardman, which had been bulldozer stripped by the highway department because they were doing highway development like right along it. So they had a real complete look at all the features there. We wanted something similar for Holman Springs. Well, and then we found a salt furnace and got excited and got distracted, so we didn't really get that. So June 1st through 15th, we're going to go back out and essentially start working in checkerboard to fill in that area. And now that we know, sort of the rough layout of the Caddo component, start filling it in and really start better understanding the architecture of the Caddos and their time there. This is also going to be a great opportunity for us to do something that we've been talking about for years. In 2019, we had the training program at a different Caddo site, also in Sevier County, a place called Locksburg Mounds. And our basic excavation students there were trained how to collect data on tablets instead of the paper forms that we've used for decades. And since we know the site really well at this point, we've got sort of good logistics and infrastructure. We've got nice camping. We've got a nice lab set up. We're going to start the process of transitioning the training programs into tablet-based digital data collection. So I fully expect that this will go very smoothly with absolutely no hiccups whatsoever. But having this site that we're comfortable on, I think it'll give us an opportunity to sort of work through some of those kinks together. And that's how we've always done things well. We'll be able to offer. Okay, so my apologies. This is an old slide. Dr. Bragg is no longer with us, so we won't be able to offer that class. But we'll have a 3D scanning class with Sarah Shepard from our coordinating office here. Dr. Jamie Lockhart will be teaching a class on geophysics Dr. Zbecki on human osteology. I don't think I can get Dr. Scott to not stop offering site survey. He loves it, so it'd be a great opportunity. And then Dr. Julie Morrow will be doing a survey class looking at the Indians of Arkansas and basically the histories of the indigenous peoples that have lived here through the past. So we'll also have basic excavation and basic lab classes both weeks, so people can come out and take any of those that they would like. And as I close, I'd like to acknowledge that we had 80 people in 2022 alone come out on this. This adds to the hundreds of people who've worked on the site since the 1980s. When we started that project, I very much would like to thank those who were involved in it, a fair number of whom are in the room right now. And then also specifically, thank the people who took on some kind of leadership role, influential, and had influential parts to play in this project. So thank you for coming, and I'm happy to answer or try to answer any questions you might have.
That greasy soil mixture that you guys were working with, was there any lab analysis to tell you what that grease, was that in fact bare?
I think it was basically just, we haven't done any kind of lab analysis on it. Using the term greasy to sort of just describe how it felt, it's more like if you ever let your grill go too long without cleaning it out, when you get in that sort of greasy, kind of sooty feeling, quality to it, it had that feel to it.
So it could be like carbonized.
Yeah.
With the historical salt making set, was that was that an indoor thing? Did they have like a structure around it, or was that all outdoor?
Well, I think it must have had some kind of cover over it, because if it starts raining, you don't want you don't want the contents of the kettle getting diluted or cooled. You also don't want superheated cast iron getting cold water splashed on it. It's not good for it. So it must have had some cover. We haven't, part of why I've been digging around it is we've been looking for any kind of like historic period post hole that would be related to like a superstructure. We haven't seen that yet. Also, curiously, we've gotten basically no nails off of the site, which unless they carted the, either they had some kind of construction that didn't involve it, or they took the covering away with the nails on it. It certainly didn't degrade in place the way that we've seen with a lot of other 19th century sites.
At the most basic level, why salt? Who needed it? How did they use it?
Well, it's got a lot of applications. You need it in your food. If you ever drink a Gatorade that's basically salt water with enough sweet over it to where it doesn't taste salty. So it also can be used as a dye fixative in textile manufacture. And we see throughout native North America, salt production seems to become more important to local food traditions when corn becomes a staple part of the diet, because plant-based diets tend to be much lower sodium than ones that are meat heavier. So if you're consuming more of your calories from meat, you really don't need to supplement. But when corn becomes a more stable part, more central part of the diet, people do need to start supplementing, and it also tastes good. But if you don't have it, you wind up with a condition called hyponatremia, and the DeSoto expedition actually suffered from this. They talk about men's skin turning kind of green and starting to like reek a little bit. And I grew up in Houston, and I had a friend who tried running the Houston Marathon on only water. And he woke up in the hospital a couple weeks later because his brain tried to swell out of his head. This can be a real dangerous condition.
Thank you so much for this talk. It's really interesting.
You.
Going back to the bare bones that you found, I might have missed it, but what's the stratigraphic relationship with where you found the bare bones to that burn deposit and the kiln, or is it a deeper association with the Caddo
So the burn pit comes up, and the tail of that the test unit 14, that feature that we were digging in, actually seems to overlie it a little bit. So it's definitely a 19th century thing, maybe possibly later 19th century. I think a lot of that brick roll is basically the chimney and any kind of superstructure, being pushed into the, pardon me, being pushed into the fire pit after it's gone out of use. We know that it was used in the 1860s because we have Confederate records of it. It's actually operated by enslaved African Americans during that time. But no one seems to live there. This is, which is partly why there's no glass or pottery on it. It's not, people come there to work. There was one known historical account from a guy working at what has often been interpreted as this salt works. We think is actually maybe the Hickman Salt Works, also in Sevier County. We think it's sort of more of a late 19th, 1860s, 1870s kind of association there.
Are those bones really smashed up? Like it's clear from
No,
breakdowns, or-
they're mostly whole up and complete, and they seem to, I want to say the ones that we found are mostly from sort of the paws area. So they're not the big sort of meat-bearing portions of the animal.
Did the Caddo take their salt brine all the way to dryness, or did they use those jugs and transport it in a real concentrated form?
What we've seen so there are only a handful of accounts that talk about the Caddo specifically making salt. There are more expansive ones for like Mesoamerica and the Mayans and a couple other places in the southeast. When it seems like the way it takes place is that it's sort of cooked down to a sort of a thick slurry and then transferred to a very tightly woven basket and suspended, and the last sort of moisture kind of drips out of it there, but it winds up essentially as a hard a hard quantity of salt that then can be transported, probably like in a basket or a wrapping or something. The pottery is not a very good shipping container. It's heavy, tendency to break. It's probably gonna be something that's more flexible, like a probably basket or like a cloth wrap. Sure.
Could you show the classes again, please? Thank you.
What was the dissolved solids content of the water they were actually using? Milligrams
Well-
per liter.
Glenn, do you recall?
Well, what we analyzed, it was very low from the bayou. And I think it's because groundwater the levels have been lowered. And so what we were measuring was mostly just surface water.
Yeah, and the salt content's higher in towards the surface as towards the bottom. They actually, I didn't mention it, in the 19th century there's been found a well immediately adjacent to the salt marsh, and a lot of these salt sites will have the wells because in the 19th century they'd sink pumps down to the bottom, because if you can pump from the bottom of the water column, there's more salt in it, and so it takes less to render that down into an actual salt. So what we've measured, it hasn't been as very low salinity, but there's a lot of mitigating factors.
Carl, do you think, so you mentioned that this salt is being traded far and wide. It's leaving this valley, right?
Yeah.
Is anything coming in?
I haven't looked at that part yet. I know but by the time you get to the 1500s and 1600s, salt's one of the things being used in the horse trade. A lot of as the Plains tribes start taking up horses from the Spanish, and that's Paul Eubanks's work, Drake Salt Works in northern Louisiana. I think that's all tied into the horse trade. Not at this. So we worked on the Locksburg Mound site, which probably is roughly contemporary to the site. It's a few miles away. There were some wooden bowls excavated off one of those mounds back in the 1980s. That the art style is very reminiscent of like lower Mississippi Valley. It's not like a Caddo art style. So there's, you know, there are things going back and forth. They simply just haven't looked at that part yet.
Do you think the salt's going up to one of those mound centers? Like, do you think there's more control above this community, or?
I would think so. I think with the scale that they're making it at, you know, there are 2 Caddo salt sites that we know of that had like mounds of broken pottery. So this and the Bayou Cell site outside Arkadelphia. All the ones in Texas and Louisiana, they have, you know, you'll have like a thick carpet of shells assured, but not this, you know, this huge in our case 10-foot tall mound of pottery. I think they're doing it on a more specialized, I don't want to fully say industrial scale than elsewhere, but there's something more going on that I would expect that's directed from somewhere else. But you know, these salt deposits basically are available only in certain parts of the Southeast, and so the communities that have access to them do trade. You know, historical accounts also suggest they trade those fairly extensively. And these, you know, the original source for these salt deposits is called the Luan salt. It's millions of years old, deeply buried salt deposit. Doesn't extend into what is now the Great Plains. So, you know, the Wichitas and the Kiowas and the groups that are out that way, they don't have access to this, so they're going to have to trade. And I should mention, you know, one of the reasons that the salt furnace gets started in the 1830s is that as American settlers come in, you know, they need salt. It's part of their foodways, but, you know, both for food production and also preservation, you know, like salting pork, salting meats, that kind of thing. It is also started in no small part because the only salt producers in the area are the Choctaws across the border in what is now Oklahoma. And American settlers coming in didn't want to give money to Native Americans. So this is a little bit about like salt independence from Native communities. And that's one of the things I find kind of interesting. You know, the Caddos are basically using that salt to increase their ties and connections to neighbors. Early American settlers are doing it so they can sever ties and connections with neighbors. It's you know, the ramifications of this are, you know, fairly significant in a lot of ways. Well, thank you all for coming.